Richard Nixon's siblings, the brothers who shaped him, challenged him, and in one case, left a lasting scar he never quite healed from. Their lives were a mix of promise, tragedy, business, war, controversy, and quiet resilience. Let's start with the brother who never made it to adulthood, but left behind a legacy of heartbreak that would shape a president's soul. Number 4, Harold Samuel Nixon was born on June 1, 1909, in Yorba Linda, California. He was the first of 5 Nixon sons, the golden boy of the family. With blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a confident personality, Harold was everything you'd expect from an eldest son. But more than that, he was the hope and pride of Francis and Hannah Nixon. The Nixon family wasn't rich. In fact, far from it. They ran a lemon ranch, then a service station, and every dollar was earned with sweat and prayer. They were devout Quakers, plain-living, honest people. Harold and Richard were close. Just 4 years apart in age, they shared chores, schools, and muddy walks to class in the rain. Richard later remembered those walks, not because they were special, but because Harold made them feel like adventures. He admired Harold's confidence, his charm, and even his rebellious streak. It's that older brother effect. You know, when your sibling seems cooler than you, and you just want to be like them. That was Harold for Richard. In 1922, the Nixons moved to Whittier, California. Harold, now a teenager, was enrolled at Whittier High School. But things weren't perfect. There were whispers of trouble in the neighborhood, and that led the family to send Harold across the country to Mount Hermon School in Massachusetts. A big decision, and not an easy one. No one's sure exactly what that trouble was, but what we do know is this. Harold's health began to falter. By the time Harold returned home to Whittier, he wasn't the same. He took small jobs, helped out where he could, and even earned a pilot's certificate, chasing a dream of flying that would never quite take off. Then came the diagnosis that changed everything: tuberculosis. It was 1933. There were no antibiotics, no real cure, just hope. And Arizona. The dry air of the desert was said to help people breathe easier, and so Harold and his mother, Hannah, made the journey together. She even opened a small clinic to help others, while quietly praying for her son's recovery. But it wasn't enough. Harold died on March 7, 1933, in Yorba Linda, just 23 years old, the golden boy, gone. Richard was devastated. He cried for weeks. His mother was broken, and his father, Frank Nixon, believed it was God's punishment for something they had done wrong. That guilt, that grief, that silence around the dinner table, it stayed with Richard for life. Number 3, Donald Nixon, Francis. Donald Nixon, known simply as Donald, was born on November 23, 1914, in Yorba Linda, California. He was the third of the 5 Nixon brothers, tucked right between Richard and the tragic Arthur. If Harold was the golden boy and Richard was the quiet striver, Donald was something else entirely. He was described as good-natured, easygoing, and far more socially at ease than his more serious, ambitious brother. Growing up, Donald and Richard were close, in age and in proximity. But as they aged, their lives drifted in drastically different directions. Donald didn't aim for law school or politics. Instead, he stepped into the world of business, with varying degrees of success and a hefty share of scandal. You see, when your brother is president of the United States, especially one named Nixon, your life doesn't stay private for long. In the late 1950s, Donald owned a drive-in restaurant in Whittier, California. Pretty normal stuff. Until he hit a rough patch and needed a financial lifeline. That lifeline came in the form of a $205,000 loan from none other than billionaire Howard Hughes. Yeah, you read that right. Howard Hughes, the eccentric mogul who built airplanes, made movies, and dabbled in strange conspiracies. Not exactly someone you want floating around your family finances when your brother is trying to get elected president. The loan was supposed to save Donald's struggling business. Spoiler alert, it didn't. The restaurant still went bankrupt, and now Nixon's enemies had a weapon. In politics, optics are everything. And this? This looked shady. Was Donald acting as a middleman between Hughes and the future president? Was the money meant to curry favor with Richard? Those questions swirled and stuck for years. Richard Nixon, for his part, tried to keep Donald at arm's length once he got into office. Here's one for the tabloids. During Nixon's presidency, Donald's son, Donald Nixon Jr., reportedly joined a hippie commune. No big deal, right? Well, unless the president sends a White House investigator to drag him out. Yep, that happened. Just another episode in the ongoing saga of keeping the Nixon name untarnished, even when the damage came from within. Then came Watergate, and with it, more Donald Nixon headlines. According to Senate investigators, Donald and his brother Edward had received part of a mysterious $100,000 campaign contribution. Cue the suspicion, the taped conversations, and the paranoia that defined Richard Nixon's presidency. Richard even mentioned Donald on the infamous White House tapes, worrying aloud about what his brother might have done or said. Behind the scandals, Donald Nixon was, by many accounts, a regular guy. He married Clara Jane Lemke in 1942. They had 3 kids. He worked in sales, consulting, food services. He sat on the Whittier School Board. He lived a suburban life, with bursts of high-profile drama, whether he wanted it or not. Later in life, Donald avoided the spotlight. He passed away on June 27, 1987, at the age of 72, quietly and out of the public eye. Number 2. Arthur Nixon. Arthur Burge. Nixon was born on May 26, 1918, in Yorba Linda, California. He was the 4th son of Francis and Hannah Nixon, and his name, like his brothers Harold, Richard, and Edward, was taken straight from British royalty. He was sweet, joyful, always laughing, the kind of kid who seemed to lighten the whole room just by walking into it. That's how Richard Nixon remembered him, as the cheerful younger brother who brought peace into their stormy little household. And then, he was gone. Arthur died on August 10, 1925. He was just 7 years old. The cause? Tubercular encephalitis, a severe infection that inflames the brain. At the time, it was practically untreatable. Richard said once that he cried for weeks after Arthur died, and that the pain stayed with him into adulthood. It was one of the only times he talked openly about emotion. He wasn't known for wearing his heart on his sleeve, but Arthur, that was a soft spot. Number 1. Edward Nixon. Born on May 3, 1930, Edward Calvert Nixon was the baby of the Nixon family. Unlike some of his older brothers, Edward never rebelled. Instead, he studied, served, and in his own words, found purpose through science. Edward's academic record was stellar. He graduated from Duke University in 1952 with a degree in geology. Then, he went even further, earning a master's degree in geological engineering from North Carolina State College just 2 years later. That curiosity about Earth's natural forces would stick with him for life. But before he got too cozy with rocks and core samples, Edward joined the Navy. He became a naval aviator and a helicopter flight instructor, eventually achieving the rank of captain in the Naval Reserves. He even taught naval science at the University of Washington. One of his students later described Edward as the kind of guy you'd trust with your life, or at least your midterms. Unlike Donald, Edward Nixon never made headlines for business deals gone sideways. Instead, he built something of his own. In 1971, Edward launched Nixon World Enterprises, a global consulting firm that focused on energy, natural resources, and environmental innovation. It was based out of Washington State, far from the DC spotlight. He consulted on mining projects, evaluated solar tech, and even advised companies on waste disposal and clean energy strategies. His resume included work on the Apollo space project, mining reforms in China's Hebei province, and solar development in California. Edward may not have wanted the political limelight, But when your brother is the President of the United States, it tends to follow you. He campaigned for Richard in both 1968 and 1972. In fact, during Nixon's re-election campaign, Edward served as co-chairman of the committee, coordinating efforts, managing mail, and helping shape messaging from behind the scenes. After the Watergate scandal erupted, Edward did something few others did. He stood by his brother. He even testified in the trial of Maurice Stans and John Mitchell, contradicting government witnesses and defending the integrity of Nixon's inner circle. When Richard resigned, Edward didn't vanish. He visited the family's San Clemente retreat. He made public appearances in defense of his brother. He even helped create the Richard Nixon Foundation and sat on its board for years. Edward Nixon wasn't just a scientist in a lab coat. He was a bridge builder, sometimes literally, sometimes politically. After Richard's groundbreaking trip to China in 1972, Edward followed up with more than 30 goodwill missions to the country. The Chinese government welcomed him warmly, viewing him as an extension of the president who had opened diplomatic doors. On these trips, Edward met with scientists, government officials, and business leaders. He helped facilitate trade. He often said that his favorite role was quiet ambassador. In 1957, Edward married Gay Lynn Woods, a schoolteacher from Florida. They had 2 daughters, Amelie and Elizabeth, and stayed married for 56 years, until Gay passed away in 2014. The family lived in the Pacific Northwest, and by all accounts, Edward was a devoted husband and a grounded father. After Richard's death in 1994, Edward became the last surviving Nixon brother. He took on the mantle of family historian, archivist, and unofficial guardian of the Nixon legacy. In 2009, Edward published his memoir, The Nixons, A Family Portrait. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was heartfelt. In the book, he gave rare insights into the Nixon household, including his relationship with his parents, his memories of Arthur and Harold, and what it really meant to grow up under the shadow and protection of a brother like Richard. He died on February 27, 2019, in a nursing home in Bothell, Washington. He was 88th. Together, they shaped one of the most complex presidents in American history.